Joining me now in studio, Lynette Ong, Associate Professor of Political Science at the Asian Institute at the Munk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy, and Andrea Chun. She's a Hong Kong Canadian lawyer, political commentator, and radio host. Good to see you both here today. I want to start with sort of the issue that has been hard for non-Cantonese speaking people to understand around the language that was used by Carrie Lam, that the bill is dead, but not, I guess, withdrawn. Should we read anything into the way she explained this? I'll start with you, Lynn.
I think naturally people will speculate whether the bill is really dead, suspended, or really withdrawn. Because generally, I think people just mistrust her government.
Yeah.
She's seen as a puppet of Beijing authorities. I think that is kind of expected. My sense is I think the bill is dead for now. In the near future, it's difficult to rule out that it might be resuscitated or, tightening of political control overall in Hong Kong.
It does seem, though, well, I mean, this is coming from a Western perspective, but it does seem like it would be political suicide for her to try and reintroduce it. Is that the wrong reading of that?
I'm not sure whether there's any type of political suicide since she's really not elected by the people.
Yes.
So, and she's really accountable mostly to Beijing. Mm-hmm. Now, having said that, I think the language here, shall we spend a lot of time dwelling on it? Because the translation might be lost that it was a natural death as opposed to she killed it. Mm-hmm. But the bottom line is, if it is dead for now, as Lynette says, even if she promises to withdraw, what does that really mean? Does that mean future governments cannot reintroduce any type of form or a similar version of it? So to me, I think the discussion should move on, although the protesters are not happy with what she just said.
So should the protesters declare a victory of sorts here?
It really depends on how you define victory. So I think the more immediate demand is putting this extradition bill out of fire. Yeah. But I think there's overall an underlying concern that there's a lot of economic grievances, huge income inequality in Hong Kong, a lot of young people priced out of rising housing market. I think all those things are actually not addressed, coupled with erosion of the rule of law, political issue, lack of political freedom, yes, and all those things under threat. So very uniqueness of Hong Kong, yes, I think is under threat. And I think those is not, I don't think the protesters have been successful on those fronts. No, just immediately on the extradition bill.
So do we see then, as a reaction or response to this encroachment by China into Hong Kong, that the protests would continue, that there would be an ongoing sort of rebellion in the streets?
I think the movement would definitely continue, whether it's by way of further mass protests or other forms, because there are upcoming elections, whether it's local elections or other elections. There have been legislators who have been disqualified. They're still calling for the charges to be dropped against those what they call alleged rioters, what I call peaceful protesters, or just isolated incidents of violence. Carrie Lam is not going to quit anytime soon, although that's one of their demands. So I think by and large, it's percolated to the point where I think Beijing would be concerned with the number of people who are out there, yes, and the international scrutiny. So we've got all fronts, international focus and attention on this.
Does that then pose problems for China's relationship with Taiwan? Does Taiwan then look at what's happening in Hong Kong and say, oh, this is how we push back against China and make sure we preserve our independence?
I'm sure people in Taiwan are watching the situation in Hong Kong very closely, because the model of one country, two system is supposed to be applied to Taiwan. Yeah. I think what is happening is it is hardening the people, the DPP camp, because they are going to, the pro-democracy camp, yes, they are going to point at the situation in Hong Kong, saying that there's no way that we want this one country, two system to be applied to us. But I think what is also happening is there are going to be some conservative people, pro-Kuomintang, pro-reunification. They are going to point at the chaos in Hong Kong, saying that, look at this is what happens if you give young people democracy. Right. You never want to do that, and therefore you want to return to China's rule. So I think
it could go both ways.
Right. So I think things in Taiwan are getting more polarized.
Through this, Canada has said a little bit as the protests were in the streets. What should they make of the situation now, given that Canada is currently in this ongoing, extremely tense relationship with China? Andrea?
I think Canada's in a very, very tight spot. I think as an international citizen, we should speak out against any violation of human rights.
Sure.
And certainly, Mr. Trudeau probably has raised it with China. Having said that, they've got 2 Canadians locked up now, where they're exerting economic pressure. Given what is happening with our relationship with China, I think not much might be able to be achieved by speaking to them. And I saw how they sat next to each other at the G20, and they weren't even talking to each other. So I think at this point, Canada might have to be a bit more pragmatic, and worry about the 2 Canadians who
They did speak off to the side in quiet moments when they could. But Lynette, would you agree that this isn't really something we should be getting involved in?
I think our priorities should be to secure the release of the 2 Michaels as soon as possible. I mean, what is happening in Hong Kong, I think, is everyone's interest, particularly those of democracies, to see freedom and rule of law return to Hong Kong.
Yeah.
But I think our immediate foreign policy priorities is really Canadians who are in Beijing.
Okay. Andrea, Lynette, good of you to come in. Appreciate your perspectives tonight. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you.